Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this conversation, really a listening session on our part around transportation considerations as we look to reopen California schools. I'm Tasha Davenport. I am the Deputy Executive Director for CASBO and the Chief Operations Officer here. And I'm joined today by Sarah Botches. She's CASBO's Chief Governmental Relations Officer. And we have a featured guest today, Matt Sanchez. Thank you for joining us. Matt is the chair of CASBO's Transportation Professional Council. And in his real life, his real work, he is the director of transportation for Elk Grove Unified School District. And again, thank you for joining us, Matt. So I'm just going to kind of create a framework for the conversation that we're about to have. And again, we're going to start with, it's a listening session, and I'm going to add to that that we do not have the answers. That's not our purpose, and we're not so arrogant to think that we do. What we really have done over the course of this week is talked with all of our professional councils to get your input, and I'll explain why in a moment, aside from the obvious. So because of the great work of our Legislative Advocacy Committee, our leader members, and also our governmental relations team of Sarah and Elizabeth Escobar, because of all their great work, we've been invited into some very important conversations taking place at the state and federal level around reopening schools, and I'll just kind of walk you through those. The first is that with the other management organizations, so the California School Boards Association, CSBA, AXA, the Superintendent and Administrator Association, Small School Districts Association, and CSESA, and ourselves, that management team has formed a coalition to say, here's our number one priority right now, and that is to get the input from the folks that are doing the job so that we can better inform the policymakers versus having the tail wag the dog. So we can better inform the policymakers on the funding and the complexities and the intricacies of this huge event in front of us, which is reopening the schools. So we are a unified group of management in that area. The second conversation, we were on an evening basis, we were nightly with the governor's office, and that's switched to now a couple of times a week in the evenings. And it's really to do the same, again, still advising the policy makers, but also trying to get ahead of some of the executive orders as they were and continue to come out, helping shape those so that they have a little bit more of reality to them. I think we saw the LCAP change a bit, and I think get reduced to a much smaller sort of document and criteria. And so really working with the governor's office to also help the group understand that when they make statements like school's going to open in July, just the total disconnect that is in place there for the reality of that. And so we've been working hard in those conversations. And then finally, the superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman, has formed a task force of about 30 entities that includes the labor groups as well. CDE is a part of many of these conversations, of course. And so that group is also tasked with what is it going to take to reopen schools. So from these multiple perspectives, I share that so that you understand that, again, we don't have the answers, but these questions are critical because what we are doing is pivoting and not only getting the answers for you, but sharing with our policymakers that when they want to consider, testing for all students, how does that impact all of these other pieces? Is that before the kids get on the bus? Is there a nurse there to deliver that testing? What does all this look like? And so, again, just helping us be informed, and then secondly, turning that information back to you with analysis, with answers, and with some best practices for what our districts around the state are doing. So that's just kind of the background for why we decided to pull all of our professional councils together, and really understanding that many schools are looking at very different models and options for how to open. I think just through the course of today, we've heard of a school that's doing a morning sessions, half day, flipping their classrooms, sanitizing those, and then doing the afternoon. We know we have that cohort model of, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays for one group, and then the next week they would be Tuesday, Thursdays. We see in other countries they're opening with their younger grades first, K through third, and then they're over time, releasing to the rest. So one thing we're very sure of is that there's not going to be a one size fits all, but we're also very confident that we need some general protocols, some standards for how we're actually going to open. We heard on our last call, what is the formula of PPE to adult to student? What are those ratios? And so really continuing to work with CDE and the health organizations to come out with some criteria so we don't have to, make the rules of the game ourselves. We need to have some rules of the game, and then we can have our flexibility around that as a district at the district level. So as we look at those different models, right, then there are all these other considerations that are not standalone. They're all highly integrated in those decisions. And today we're of course here to talk about the transportation perspective. So in our listening session today, we will be taking the information back in, again, answering some questions as or if we have information available. Sarah continues to meet with CDE on a very regular basis, but really taking that information and putting it into 4 buckets in which we can then come back out and have, some best practices and guidelines on policy and funding, the continuity of learning and what that looks like, conditions in which we're going to have our students back in work or back in school, and leadership and planning around this entire endeavor. And then, finally, this also gives us a roadmap for the continued advocacy that is not beginning with this. It's been in place a long time for the funding that's going to be necessary. We follow this call with, a conversation with Mike Fine to talk about, the funding and what we're hearing. We all know it comes out the 14th, the budget does, but what we're hearing as a backdrop to these massive changes and considerations and investments that we're going to make, and how do we reconcile, these things. So continued advocacy on funding, certainly legislative and regulatory areas that we need relief on, waivers, in some cases, California law is stricter than federal law, and how do we continue to work through those issues so that we are best prepared to reopen our schools. So that's our conversation today. We're going to take the first bit of time just sharing a little bit more context for that, and then the majority of the call is really going to be opening up to you to ask your questions. Again, we may or may not have the answers, but we'll certainly get them for you. So without further ado, I want to turn the conversation over to Matt. Again, thank you for joining us. Elk Grove is such a highly respected school district, and thanks for taking your time to share your insights of how this looks for you today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, even though we have many challenges ahead of us. One of the main challenges, of course, being the lack of information that we have to make the decisions that we need to be able to make. So we have a great challenge ahead of us. Yet at the same time, I feel like we have a great opportunity in front of us to kind of relook at our vision and our service and how we provide that service, and look for opportunities that we can kind of reflect on all the things that we've done well and maybe not so well in transportation, and apply that knowledge and wisdom towards evolving into a new type of service. What we evolve to is going to be quite different, and it's really hard to anticipate what that is going to look like for all of us. But I am very excited about the opportunity that we have to redefine our service and to provide a high level of service while we do that. But these challenges are real. And with today's presentation, I just kind of want to stir some thoughts and ideas that we might generate some questions that I may have the opportunity to learn from everybody that's listening. And maybe I can share some things as well that may be beneficial for you today as well. So the 5 things mainly that I really want to cover today are communication and collaboration, preparing for service, driver recruitment and training, meetings that we should be thinking about organizing, and union collaboration. So first, with communication and collaboration, it's very challenging to receive information that we need at this time, because for the most part, cabinet and our deputy superintendents that we report to are most likely in some pretty heavy budget decisions right now. and trying to get a direction as far as when and how schools plan on opening. Until they set a precedence for that standard that we can adhere and learn and apply to our school bus service, it leaves us with the option of looking at very wide parameters of service that we may be providing. So I'm trying to be mindful of the bookend, so to speak, of the parameters of service. Both bookends are extremely highly unlikely to happen. One would be just returning to service as normal, and the other bookend would be we're not ready to provide transportation services yet. And then we have to look at everything in between, and as we get more information, try and prepare different plans that we can present upward of how we can accommodate the needs of the students dependent upon the learning environments that they're going to be returning to. So I think that it's going to be very challenging, but we have always had solid state agencies and organizations that have been supportive of helping us, including CASTO and CASBO, California Department of Education, Department of Motor Vehicles, California Highway Patrol. All three of those agencies have already been very responsive to giving us guidance, and I know they will continue to do so. The next point I want to make is preparing for service. And I wanted to cover one more thing in communication and collaboration, and that is understanding that the need for us to be very flexible and cooperative with the directions that we're going to be getting, because what will be requested of us is going to be very abnormal. So we're going to need to be understanding, flexible, and cooperative. Information, of course, right now is very limited, but I think that information is going to be coming really soon for us to start making some direction. So I think having some type of creating some communication teams, both internally and externally at this time, is important. So how will you communicate back and forth? What's your staff doing now? Are they home? Are they working periodically? Do they have any duties at all? At Elk Grove, our drivers are at home right now. Doing our best to keep communication with them. We have created a Google Classroom in which our drivers are participating in assignments that we post. We've also posted training opportunities, for example, through QStrain that they can participate in. And I'm currently reviewing some of the curriculum from NHTSA to see what might be available that doesn't contradict CDE curriculum, that we can encourage our staff to participate in those training sessions. So these internal communication teams that we need to create are important, both with our drivers to establish two-way communication and communication forums. That Google Classroom, if you were to create one, is similar to a Facebook type of page where they are able to add to a stream. So you can put communication updates on that stream, and then you can get feedback back and forth with those drivers. We've also created assignments for them to participate in on how we can improve our level of service. Communication teams also with dispatch, scheduling, and training are also very important. So we can make sure that we're keeping an eye on the direction we're heading. Right now, the direction we're heading is trying to prepare normally for what we would anticipate for a school year, which means we would just be finishing up all of our ESY planning right now for summer school transportation, and we're beginning our beginning of the year scheduling for our beginning of the year program in August. So with that in mind, and stay-at-home orders still in effect, and trying to adhere to essential staff, we're having to navigate that carefully with bringing people in and preparing for the school year. External communication teams that we should be thinking about, of course, with special ed. Special ed has to be just really kind of crazy right now with trying to develop distance learning opportunities for special ed. And so Elk Grove has decided to only offer distance learning for ESY special ed. There will be no transportation for summer school, and I have still not heard at this time any direction with the beginning of the year startup. But an external team that I'm communicating with is my special ed department to stay on top of information that they receive so that I can best support our special ed students in the timing of our transportation services. My HR support, talking with our HR department regularly. I was online today with them talking, getting as much direction as I possibly can, because again, the parameters that I'm looking at of service and those parameters I'm trying to get down into a direction. Our communications department, making sure they're understanding what I'm doing to communicate with my staff. And of course, maintenance and operations with any type of equipment that might need to be obtained in relation to PPE equipment. And that is going to change. I mean, the information that we've got just today compared to 2 weeks ago is so different. So, and trying to anticipate where we will be in 2 to 3 weeks from now is also very challenging. So as we define who we are, and while our transportation service and vision changes, I really do appreciate our state organizations, CASBO, for helping us and supporting us, and also the California Department of Education, DMV, and CHP. The third point I want to make is preparing for service. I've talked a little bit about starting routing and scheduling for the school year. I've talked about ESY, Elk Grove's not providing ESY school bus transportation. You know, what normal is going to be? Which way are we going to head with this? There's so many different options and rumors out there what each district might evolve towards. We could end up seeing a combination of early, late starts to try and reduce the amount of students that are in a classroom at a time. How they define social distancing by the time we go back to school is probably going to be a lot different of how they're defining it now. So it's really hard for us to prepare and spend money on supplies and equipment when we know there's going to be a change. And so again, all these things are forcing us to be very patient and understanding, and our employees are nervous. They want to know their jobs are secure, and they want to know that we're going to protect them when they come back and that they're going to be safe. So that's why it's so important to keep the collaboration going with our unions. But as far as preparing for service, we have so many things we're going to be focusing on different plans. I think it's also important to focus on the foundation of why we are here, the safety of the students. And as we know, the most vulnerable place for our students is the loading and unloading environments. And at this time, I think to keep our eye on the ball as far as how are we evaluating our school bus stops, and how are we going to look at our training system to try and make sure our drivers are trained appropriately, they're confident, they're competent, and they're proficient in their equipment, and trying to make sure we're maintaining that level of service that we've always provided and not get distracted too much away with the realities of the situation we're trying to address. Driver recruitment and driver training. This is another real challenge for all of us, as CHP has stopped doing any testing of drivers in California. So I know we finally got 2 of our last drivers tested, I think the week that everything was unfolding for our district, which was March 9th and 10th. So those were the final 2 drivers that we brought on board. We had a classroom and session with 9 students in it. And those 9 students, we had to discontinue that classroom. They still had another unit or two to complete. And some of those students will need to be scheduled for testing, which is going to be a potential problem with CHP coming back and being inundated with requests from us for both fingerprinting for originals, getting the ball rolling for new people, and testing our renewals and original drivers. I think the best thing that I can do right now for our district, what I'm trying to do, is just try and look at ways to be more efficient with our training program. So how are we going to better recruit? How are we going to streamline the process between HR and transportation so that we reduce any delays in that hiring process? That's all different for all of us depending upon our situation. Some of us pay for training, some of us don't. But right now, I think it's going to be critical to try and get people trained as soon as we possibly can. For example, I had in 2017-18, we had trained and hired 22 drivers that year. 2018-19, we went up to 38 people we trained. So we increased the number of people we trained by almost twice as much in 1 year by streamlining our process. But now our training system, like yours, has come to a screeching halt. We don't have a classroom session going. We may not have people behind the wheel in training. And so the demands on us with staffing is a little nerve-wracking for all of us, especially when there's talks of social distancing. If there are social distancing requirements on the school bus, which I don't know how you do that in relation to maybe even reducing kids to 13 kids on an 84 passenger, but I don't even know if that would even be appropriate, and I'm not even qualified to make that decision. I'll leave that to health experts. But it's going to be extremely challenging to try and accommodate any type of social distancing on a school bus. But if there is a mandate to reduce passenger counts on buses, that means we would need more routes and more drivers. And when we have a national epidemic of 88% of our school districts nationwide are reporting a driver shortage, this is, again, a challenge we have ahead of us. The next point I wanted to make is just about meetings that we should be consider organizing. Of course, we probably all have ongoing meetings with our boss. My next meeting with the deputy superintendent is this Friday at 10 a.m. I'm hopeful that I have more information, but I also know the reality of they're also waiting for information from the state as well before they start making more decisions. And any budgetary decisions that they need to make certainly isn't going to happen by this Friday. But the collaboration that's going to take place between my boss and myself is important communication that goes back and forth so that he can better understand the concerns and the constraints that we have in transportation. Again, maintenance and operations, I mentioned that. That's another meeting that should be scheduled. HR, you should be scheduling meetings with your HR department, and they all might be very inundated at this time, but putting us on their radar is important. And union collaboration. Because we are going to be experiencing so many changes this year, it really breeds the potential for a lot of misunderstanding with intent of how we're going to be providing the service with our staff and our unions. So the more we can get out ahead of communication and collaboration with our unions is going to be extremely beneficial. I have a meeting every Wednesday with our ATU union, and we collaborate and have ideas on how we can get things done. So I think that's another very proactive way that we can all stay involved with making sure we're on the same page with our staff and employees and their needs. And I guess my final thoughts are just simply that we need to be thoughtful. We need to continue to try and connect with all of the people above us and beside us and the people that report to us. We need to collaborate with the utmost patience and kindness, and we need to be flexible to adjust and maneuver as necessary. I'll be happy to try and answer any questions, and I'd even be more happy to learn from you what might be happening in your area and things that you could add to the presentation today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt.
You're welcome.
So then, sorry, we didn't want to create a feedback loop. Good afternoon. Yes, which caused a flurry. Based on criteria that the state has to meet before there's consideration of reopening schools and childcare centers, which means stabilization of hospitals, sufficient personal protective equipment must be readily available to purchase, sufficient testing capacity to meet the demand, as well as contact tracing capacity statewide. And so because of that, we have been in various conversations at the state level, continuing to advocate on your behalf. And we felt that it was critical that we ensured your feedback and your comments. As we know, next Thursday, the governor is expected to release his May revision. We know that revenues have tanked because the state is not collecting personal income tax, corporate taxes until July 15th, that have accommodated opportunities for folks to take a little bit longer to pay, which means that it will affect the state's overall revenue sources. As we try to decipher that information, what it means for Proposition 98, we think again it is important that all of these, all of your professions, all of the professional councils that we represent are part of the conversation as we represent you both in Sacramento and DC. Our expectations for outcomes, state and local guidance and partnership. We are focused on mitigating any potential impact of ADA loss in any of these models should we go into a hybrid with distance learning as an option, and we'll continue to push for an alternative reporting system that accounts that we can't operate in the current system that we have. And our goal really is to create a roadmap to reopening that recognizes the diversity of California school systems, that gives you and allows you to share best practices for the smalls, rural, suburban, and urban school districts that we represent. At this moment, we want to open up the forum. There's a little icon that looks like a raised hand where you could sign up to speak or comment. You're welcome to enter your question in the Q&A box. We will have Christina moderate and the flow of comments. Our goal really is to attain what information do you need that CASBO can see clarification, what supporting guidance is necessary as we begin the road to recovery and reopening, what information would be critical for you to move in this and to navigate this environment. Christina?
Thank you so much, everyone. I do have some comments on the floor already. This is great. Gabriel Santos has a comment on the driver training. Gabriel, did you want to speak to your comment? All right, Gabriel is mentioning that the drivers are at work. His drivers are participating in training and detailing all the school buses thoroughly, inside and out, in addition to exercising the bus. The mechanics are working to get all repairs completed. I have a comment, Neil Abramson. Neil, would you like to speak to your comment?
just not having enough buses, in addition to not having enough drivers, going to be fewer kids on buses, more than recreating the routes or doubling up the routes, or rather splitting up the routes. It's not having enough buses. For example, my district, it's 45 minutes each way around one way. Some of our high school runs, it would take an hour and a half to 2 hours split between the morning and afternoon session. I don't have enough buses. That's the only way to make it work. Just trying to take it all in.
Thank you, Neil. I have a question on the floor. Ellen Robinson. Ellen, would you like to speak to your question? Ellen has asked, are any of your districts paying your drivers and bus normally paying? Yeah.
Christina, could you repeat that question? You cut out.
Oh, I apologize. Can you hear me all right? Wonderful. Ellen has asked, are any of your districts paying your drivers and bus monitors who would normally be working during ESY?
So we're continuing to honor the contracts that they have, so that they will continue to be paid. We also offer, there was a question about training, and we're also offering paid training for our training candidates. That's something that's catching on throughout California. More people are doing it. But again, the training system has kind of come to a halt at this time. That there was a comment about mechanics and drivers coming in to clean buses. We have not done that yet with our driving staff, but our mechanics by our school district have been determined essential functions. Therefore, our mechanics have continued with a modified and flexible schedule since March 10th. They have come in to just perform the mandated PPMI inspections as per Title 13, 1232, and to make sure that all district vehicles are still being systematically inspected. And also the California Highway Patrol is continuing to visit our site and to provide inspections of our equipment. And they appear satisfied that we're continuing to do what we're doing with defining our mechanics as essential employees.
Thank you, Matt. I have some concurrence in the Q&A. Districts also paying their drivers full pay through the end of the current school year. I have a hand raised from Carlos Chicas. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone, how you doing, Matt? First of all, I appreciate this, guys, that we're having this forum. It's nice to hear different comments from everybody. I think the question from Ellen was regarding ESY. I know that's different for each school district. I think in Matt's case, people work year-round, right, Matt? For the most part. Those of us that have a more traditional summer session, we're still considering whether or not ESY is going to be a paid situation or not. In our case, it's not part of their yearly contract. It's like extra work during the summer. So, you know, there's a lot of, Matt mentioned discussions with union leaders. Those are happening as we speak in our district, trying to figure this out together. A lot of it is how we pay for ESY. Is it something that you know comes from our 1920 budget, and most of us budget it that way. So so the unions have somewhat of an expectation that we can accommodate the compensation for that session, the ESY session. And if I may, I just want to speak to some of the points that Matt mentioned, because I think they were excellent points.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
it's just right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, right? Trying to navigate as information is coming in. At the same time, I really appreciate what you mentioned, Matt, regarding seeing this as an opportunity. This is not going to be an easy thing to navigate. You know, we're trying to figure out how can we actually accommodate social distancing standards and what those might look like at any given time on a school bus. It seems to be extremely challenging. And what does that mean at bus stops? What does that mean as kids are boarding the bus and as they're exiting the bus? One of the things I think is going to happen on a district level is going to be some sort of tracing. And, you know, for those of us that transport a number of kids, you know, we're going to have to figure out, you know, the beginning of the school day for these kids is as they board the bus, and tracing is, I think, going to be an essential aspect of us being able to reopen. So, you know, we're looking at what that would look like for our employees, health checks as they board the bus. What would that look like? And then what do you do if a student is ill or has symptoms as they arrive at the school bus? You know, we can't just abandon them there at the bus stop. So all those things are part of the discussion. I think a big piece of this is going to be, you know, how we work with our union leaders, because like Matt said, there are going to be maybe some expectations that are not usual of our employees. At the same time, I think the vast majority of employees in our district are willing to adjust, because people do want to get back to work. We want to have some level of normalcy back to that. But you know, as long as we have a reasonable approach to this, I think we'll be okay. And I also think that this is a moment in time as we, and this is what I try to impart with our employees, is that, you know, it doesn't mean that the adjustments are forever. There are some things that are going to remain with us, but this thing's going to evolve, and as it does, we'll be able to return to something more like what we're used to, with some adjustments, of course. So I do think, like Matt said, there's all kinds of opportunities. I don't think I've ever had so much TO1 time for bus drivers ever. This is going to be, they're going to have, like, you know, 60, 70 hours of TO1 time, because we also have implemented remote training. Everybody's at home, just like at Elk Grove. None of our drivers are on site. But you know, I do want to open it up. If anybody wants to go to the Capistrano Unified website, there is a training page, there's a calendar, and it's open to anybody that wants to use it with their employees that are at home. Each day since I believe, you know, middle of March has training, remote training opportunities on there with a proof of completion. So either a test or a quiz that drivers can take from their homes. And it's if anybody has any questions, just contact me directly. But yeah, that's I think that's pretty much all I had.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And if you don't mind, we will add that link to our presentation so that when it goes out to everyone, we could get it in one full swoop. Thank you. Christina?
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you. I have a comment on the floor from Neil Abramson. Neil, did you want to speak to your comment on masks?
Talking about that with our special needs department. You know, if there is going to be some type of requirement for on the students as far as masks and such, I know plenty, and I've even spoken to some of the parents, plenty of special needs students that will put a mask on, won't keep it on very long, and I'm not exactly sure how we're going to address that, if that's going to be one of the requirements to start running our small special needs buses.
Thank you, Neil. I have a question on the board from Christian. Christian, did you want to speak to your question?
Yes, I can do that. What are other districts doing for your in-service hours for your drivers, as well as drug testing to comply for your CHP drug testing pool?
So we're just documenting that the drivers are not in on duty basically, and the drivers that are coming into work for the 5 routes that we have for nutrition services delivering food, we keep them in the pool and have continued random testing for them. Our drug and alcohol testing agency has informed us that that's, along with our risk management, the best route to go for us. So as long as they enter into a safety sensitive function and they're available, they need to be tested. And then the other question was in regard to training. What was the second question?
Let me see. I'm not sure. He did not write the training question. I can give him a chance to take the floor again in a moment. I have Carlos on the floor again.
Yeah, just to echo what Matt said as far as drug testing, we're doing something similar. We do have 11 routes for meal delivery, but we are rotating our drivers. So at any given point, at one point, each one of them will participate. So we have kept them all on the drug testing in that pool. So we continue to do that. As far as training goes, we are considering all the training that we've posted, with the exception of a couple of days, as in-service worthy. Of course, we leave that up to our instructors, but we collaborated as we were coming up with this curriculum. So all of that is being documented as such. So there's going to be a lot of TO2 cards and TO1 cards.
Thank you, Carlos. At this time, the floor is clear.
Well, thank you so much. As we said, we are adding all the resources as we're getting them. We will include the Capistrano one to this list that will get sent out to you. If there's any further questions or comments, please feel free to contact me at sbaches@casbo.org under topic Reopening Schools. Our goal is to ensure that you are a voice in all of these discussions. So we look forward to continuing to hear from you directly. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.